the best public policies are created when you listen to the people who will be impacted. But how far can the public go on their say in how our policies run? To what extent can their involvement help in advancing the plethora of existing policies our government has already enacted? Welcome to A Tryst with Statecraft. I'm your host, Teresa Kurubilla, editorial intern at Project Statecraft, a youth-run, non-partisan policy think tank. My guest today seems to have the answers to these questions, given her sheer passion and astute commitment to the fields of public policy. Currently a convergence consultant with the government of Tamil Nadu and have worked under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, our guest speaker today knows a thing or two on the intricacies of power policies and their societal impact. Allow me to introduce our guest speaker today, Teres Sajeev. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Give us a brief introduction to how has your stint been with public policy and what drew you towards it?
I think it's a lot to do with my time in college, honestly. For sure, the starting point is when my decision to study humanities and for my 11th and 12th grade happened. But I think more than that, in college, being an economics and political science student, and in Stephens being in a course where this intersection was played out very well, I think a lot of learnings came from outside the classroom than from inside. And by outside the classroom, it is usually, I studied in St. Stephens, and this is usually known as a very depoliticized space. But I think I'd like to think of the year that I was studying in, especially my batch, as a couple of students who really got engaged in what was happening outside. So I think a lot of us were among the people who were there alongside farmer protests. We were there for protests against abrogation of Article 370 and so many more civil society interventions that were against a policy intervention. The COVID-19 lockdown and the consequent arrangement of rations for migrant workers. And these are the kind of things that we worked with. And I think, honestly, for sure, anti-CA and NRC, these were also big things that happened during my time in Delhi. And being part of these movements, I think, made me also very easily recognize how massive the role of government can be. And what was surprising is that a lot of these decisions were very momentary. Let's talk about the lockdown, for instance. It was a decision that was taken in a matter of maybe a day. And a decision like that had such a massive impact, such a massive outrage. And that's when I think I saw the negative part of the government, but I also started thinking, what if this institution got their decisions right, then how much can change? And I think that was possibly my introduction and interest in working in public policy. And yes, that ended up with me first joining the Ministry of Social Justice. It's a union government role. That's the first job I got. So I gladly took it. So that is basically why I got in, if that clarifies.
Wow. So it's basically all about the timing. I mean, your brush with fate, the conundrum of people you connected with, and the timing also while you were pursuing your higher education. So do you think that during the policy-making process, some groups are disproportionately represented, which in turn affects the whole motive of the policy altogether? So how do you make sure these anticipated needs are met by society?
Yes, I think we're starting off in the right lines for this conversation. I think when we talk about public policy making and inclusion, for sure the first line of thought that will come in is representation. And in representation, I think it's very important to think of the multiple layers of representation that comes in. And mostly when we think of the government, we just think of this one massive entity. But it's been very important for me to think of it as, government exists, at least in Indian context, most of the times at three levels. It's seen as panchayat, state and national level. But I think when it comes to implementation of policies, it usually centers around the center, state and district. So I think in each of these, it's very important to look at in each of these layers how much of inclusion is happening. And inclusion for sure, then second question of inclusion is when we talk about the administrative setup of inclusion, here I'm avoiding panchayat essentially because largely it's elected representatives there. But when you talk about the bureaucracy, for instance, a couple of exclusions become very evident, right? I do not remember the data very clearly yet, but I remember Trivedi Center for Political Data has very startling data on how much women is underrepresented in in the bureaucracies. And something that I've been reading up and researching on a lot about this also shows that even when women are present in policy spaces, this is just one part of the exclusion that I'm handling. There are for sure multiple other exclusions that is happening right now. So starting just out with women, um, it's a lot of times seen that even when a woman is there in a room, their sway in the decision making is not so much because you are sitting in a room with one woman and so many other people of male largely right now, and that essentially leads to a situation where for sure the women is clearly sidelined, and this is something I've seen where your eye contact is especially when a meeting is possibly initiated by the women. I've seen district collectors who essentially have an assistant who's male, and just because of the power dynamics, even when public comes to visit the collector, they'd rather talk to the PC than the district collector. So even within power dynamics, I think that kind of exclusion kind of plays out very well. And and I also emphasize this in this layers of governance, because this exclusion, I think, or the distance from the ground of the central government, at times makes this bias of exclusion a little more significant at that level. And this is essentially because being in the proximity for making rules is very important, and central government is really distant from the public when you think about it that way. And how do you strike that balance? India right now does have this thing where a couple of things are under concurrent union list, concurrent list, and the state list, right? But that kind of demarcation really doesn't happen, and you have union make policies for a lot of things that lie in the state list very, very actively, or in the concurrent list, but have more capacity to do that. And those kind of things, I think, a lot of times lead to more exclusion than you would expect.
Right. So I've just taken note of what you just said. That reminds me of an article that you wrote for Times of India talking about how the state of Tamil Nadu is quite ahead compared to the other state legislations when it comes to gender parity. And I just happened to notice that it was also very much aligned to what you just said about the lack of women in the bureaucratic levels and their role in the policy making progress. So what would you have to say to how these policies can be designed to address these aspects while also involving local communities and marginalized communities like women with reference to this art?
Yes. So I think I'd like to break down that question. Firstly, as to how gender, I made an argument there that in a lot of things, especially economic and social capital, women in Tamil Nadu are leading. But in political capital, we do agree that in Tamil Nadu also the progress hasn't been significant or has been comparatively poorer compared to the other states. But something that is really interesting to possibly acknowledge in this conversation is that while we're always very proud to say, okay, South Indian states are doing very well in terms of gender parity, it's also very important to recognize that gender parity indices are really linked to the economic capital of those places. So, owing to a lot of historical realities, possibly the Rayatwari and Zamindari systems, how the 1991 liberalization affected both the South and the North, South has been able to steadily maintain a better level of economic capital throughout. And I think that is one of the reasons why gender parity is slightly high. Is much better in the southern states than in a lot of northern states. So I think that one qualification is something that I'd like to maintain. And I think I remember the second part of the question is how do you include these multiple marginalizations into policy making? And I think I've till now committed that mistake of, saying women as one category. And I clearly kind of understand and recognize that is not the case. We do need to understand marginalizations even within this community, and also a lot of other identities, possibly in the district I work in right now, Ramanathapuram. Caste identities would possibly at times play a stronger layer of your identity than possibly your gender identity. So how and which identity you pick and kind of include in which decision is very important. I agree. And how do you design policies? I think that question largely also has to deal with how do you give them more visibility in public spaces, because you can see that in a lot of public spaces, like one of the very basic situations that you have to raise your grievances at the district level, for instance, there's a grievance day petition system where people, larger the public, comes directly and meets the government. That is a ground level first kind of interface that they have with the district collector and raises their complaints. And I think a lot of times you can see that you when you sit through these basic grievance day petitions that these district collectors are mandated to take in Tamil Nadu, you'll possibly see that even here the representation of these marginalized communities are very less. And I feel as long as you're not able to raise your concerns, how do you really navigate through them? Yeah, that is one aspect. And another aspect that I think I'm just thinking about as to how you design better policies is two things. Do you want the government to be proactive, or do you want the government to be reactive? And a lot of times I think right now the government is very reactive. Like you get something, something is going wrong, and then you try and do something to make it better. But I think at least at the local level, there's so much more that we need to do so that public policy is more accessible and reaches towards the marginalized rather than expecting them to come to us.
In a country like ours, there happens to be a lot of aversion, particularly amongst the younger adults in the policy-making progress, because it seems to have, in our country, let's say, a political connection to it as well. So how would you encourage the youth of India to be involved in this field of public policy making the way you have, not just for a momentary lapse of time because of a headline, and what awaits them when they do?
Okay. Yes. Again, I think it was a lot of questions packed into one. Firstly, just attending to the part of your question where you said, okay, a lot of these engagements are superficial. I do understand that argument, because a lot of times we are swayed by the opinion that's there in our peer group, which whatever opinion dominates our major peer group, you're possibly going to lead in that direction. And I think this is something, honestly, I was prey to as well while I was in college. I'd possibly just lean into whatever was was the dominating issue at that time. But I think something that strikes me when I think of this right now is an incident which I had with possibly it was my orientation at the Ministry of Social Justice. It was one of my early days, as you can imagine. And our secretary, a very nice man, Subramaniam sir, told us, we were all very, very up and loud about the fact that manual scavenging is a problem and we're not handling it well. And I do still recognize that we're not handling it well, not to justify what is happening at all. But I think something he said is, blaming and criticizing is something that everybody can do. But while you do that, tell me a solution as well. And I think that has been a very important insight for me, because in the government, when you work, there are so many limitations. India is a country, as you know, it has the lowest number of public employee per capita. So on state capacity, we are low. So we need people who are able to think of solutions. And there are so many solutions. And actually, solutions is one thing. And a lot of times solutions are there. Like if you look at central government policy documents a lot of time, or a lot of policies that are being implemented at the ground level, you'd possibly see that we have really good public policies on paper, but the reality on the ground is really, really different. Like I work in the district level, and I still do not have one place where I can go and look to understand what are the kind of, just one place where I can understand all the schemes that are being implemented in the district. And if somebody, I'm directly working with the collectors, and if somebody who has that much access is not able to access it, I think it's fair to assume that nobody has that kind of access. And that kind of access is at this point very much required. In terms of disbursing this knowledge, that is important. And firstly, that element is something that youth can get involved with in dispersing public policies and making connections to implement something. And the second big gap that we as a nation, I think everybody recognizes is being reiterated all the time, is that we are very low on implementation. And again, we are low on implementation because our state capacity is low. But your solutions, largely, if you can think of ways how not very abstract solutions where okay, this is the ideal thing to do, and a lot of times just to get to the ideal things is something very, very far off. But what is a practical short-term thing? Not short-term, a practical thing that you can do that is something that the state, I mean, the capacity of the state can manage, and through that, how do you implement the solution? I think this is a very difficult problem statement, and honestly, for a small, I mean, within the district level, maybe for small issues, I'm able to find answers. But on a larger scale, I think it's something very difficult to find. I'm a solution. It is improving state capacity. We are trying to do that. There are a lot of initiatives that's coming up for it. So let's hope these things pick up very soon.
Truly, we sure do hope that we can expect better. There's clearly a void in India of what could be and what has happened, particularly in lines of policy making. I've come to know, Teres, you've been involved in the United Nations Millennium Fellowship, which is an incredible platform centric to the sustainable development goals. You were given an opportunity to head a project under this fellowship. And can you tell us more about that and how it really accentuated your spectrum of policy making and how it has added to your already established experience with it?
It's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if the work that anybody does is in United Nations, I think is possibly can be seen as policy advocacy than what, and less of policy making, because at least in my head, policy making is what happens in the government sphere, and everybody else, I mean, not everybody else are largely, yes, everybody else are largely advocates for making better policies. And I think this fellowship, more than anything, gave me a perspective of how, I mean, what has a world we are working towards, and also largely meet with a lot of like-minded people who have a lot of similar aspirations. But in terms of sustainable development and public policy, I think the government, again, a lot of times have taken it up into their folds also nowadays, because sustainable development goals have been accepted very widely. So something I think I'd like to point my fingers towards is possibly just looking at how the Panchayati Raj department is now focusing on something called the localizing sustainable development goals, wherein they're saying that at the grassroots, when panchayats are developing their village development plans, you select one theme of a sustainable development goal that you want to work towards, and that is something that in the course of the next year you will have plans to just saturate that particular thing. So let's say you pick something like women-friendly panchayat, or if you pick something like child-friendly panchayat, quality education, then all your actions in the next year is possibly surrounding that. And that, I think, has been a very interesting way as to how these sustainable development goals have been integrated into public policy in India. But in terms of my experience, Healthier was a very good experience. We try to teach people about, provide sex education to young Indians. And we know the impacts of not having sufficient sex education. All of us know the impacts of it. And there's a long way to go. We are trying a lot of things in terms of getting sex education to groups right now. Right now as well, in terms of, firstly, we're starting off with the basic things such as getting menstrual health education out. But also, I think it becomes very important because in places like Ramnathpuram, again, where I work at right now, issues like child marriage and all is extremely prevalent. So in areas like this, I think extending what we did there to areas like this where it's required, because a lot of times when we did that, we were also centered towards a different crowd, which possibly still had access to more of these resources. But it's important, like you said, for more inclusion. I think a different direction of this project of sex education is to make it reach grassroots where it's required.
Wow, that's very insightful to know, considering the exposure to the policymaking you've had from the grassroots level. Teres, you've come across many policies pertaining to community development and sustainability, and you've also pointed out that there is a gap in the execution and the ideation of such policies. So if there were one such policy you were to critically analyze and reassess, which one would it be, and what changes would you bring?
This is a very interesting question. I do have a lot of policies to think about just out of my mind. But because of my limited experience, I can talk about policies that I know about. Maybe to start off with, from the ministry I worked at. One policy was for, it's called the National Action Plan for Drug Demand Reduction. This is the policy of the central government to handle the issue of substance abuse in our country. And one part of this policy largely requires that de-addiction centers be opened up in different districts of the country. It's a central sector scheme, which means that center is directly funding these de-addiction centers. So I think there are around 300 or 400 institutions across the country. I might be really wrong with the numbers, but this is what I remember. And something I noticed is that food prices in these institutions, let's say, are usually set and these institutions are supposed to provide free treatment for people who come in for their for the addiction. Now, I think a better term that is usually seen is to get treatment for drug dependence. Addiction is seen as the wrong word. Again, just clarifying. And here, what happened is that government provides funds to these institutions, and then they have a strict rule saying you cannot collect funds from the patients who come in. And government provides fund based on the norms that is made in Delhi. So you have food prices that is based out of Delhi. And food prices in Delhi really varies from the food prices, let's say, in Kerala or in Nagaland. And let's not even talk about food prices. The eating patterns vary differently. In Kerala or Nagaland, for instance, I mean, most people are not...
There is quite a difference.
Yes, people are not willing to go a meal without non-veg, for instance, and that is increasing your prices. And because these institutions cannot function under these norms, what they resort to usually is that they pay these. They get funds from their patients, and this is violation of the norms of the norms of the ministry that provides these funds. And then, because as a consequence, then this institution gets non-recommended essentially. And non-recommendation is essentially something where you're not provided funds for the next quarter or next set of time that is upcoming. I think they provided funds 2 times a year, so for the next half. And this then becomes a very vicious cycle. You are trying to actually just aid patients by providing better treatment, but then you are not able to keep up with the cost norms, and then you don't take money from, you take money from the patients. It gets reported as a non-recommended institution. And because of that, you again don't get funds, so you're now taking more money from the patients. And then it becomes a vicious cycle where ultimately most of these institutions have to close down, or they say we do not want to engage with government at all. So these kind of policies, I think, will need to look at local contextual realities a little more. And I'm still wary about thinking about the fact that central government as an institution will be the best agency to do it, because you need somebody that is more locally rooted for something like this. And another scheme that I would like to really point towards is the Pradhan Mantri Adarsh Gram Yojana. On paper, actually, the first time I was introduced to this scheme, I was very excited, to be very honest. I'm not sure if you've heard of it yet, but it's essentially where any village with more than 50% of scheduled caste population, you are given 20 lakhs per year, and also you are the rest of the part of the scheme, around 80 lakhs, is supposed to be used to converge other schemes into the into the village. And at the forefront, it looks very, very good and very exciting, because as a policy, it first and foremost recognizes the fact that these scheduled caste villages have been deprived a lot of times because of the active discrimination by people within the bureaucracy, and we need to do something very active so that people within these villages are able to access resources, just like the other villages. But on the ground, again, there is big discrepancies. Firstly, this idea of convergence that is usually made at the center, when it comes down to the district, it really doesn't manifest at all, because you already have a lot of schemes working out at the district level, and a person who is possibly I think the major pitfall of PMAGY in that sense was the fact that it was largely a replication of the village development plan, which was being led by the Panchayati Raj department. And because there was no integration between this village development plan and between what Pradhan Mantri Adarsh Gram Yojana was doing, this element of convergence was not happening at all. This 20 lakh was given, and they were building infrastructural projects out of it, very important for developing infrastructure projects. I do recognize that. But in terms of actual benefits coming out of that convergence, why you'd possibly expect all the people in this village now some action is taken so that they get schemes and all of that, wasn't essentially something that was under the purview of this scheme itself, because it was being done by other ministries. So how do you essentially cut down on all of these duplications that's happening over and over again, and actually in that sense and I do believe in this idea of convergence a lot. How do you bring in all of these multiple directions of funds and bring it so that you are at least able to see that development on the ground level? So that is one thing I think I had a lot of issues with the Pradhan Mantri Adarsh Gram Yojana also. Yeah.
Wow, so there's still a long way to go when it comes to truly involving the public, and that too, the right kind of public in the policy making progress.
So just slipped my mind, sorry. And
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
the reality that was happening in these villages also was that in Tamil Nadu, a lot of times in Pradhan Mantri Adarsh Gram Yojana, cash is allotted, like I said, for villages with 50% scheduled caste population. But even within the villages, there's clear demarcation between hamlets. So there are hamlets where the SC population lives, and then there are hamlets where mostly more dominant caste lives. And it would happen most of the times that whatever funds were going even within this PMAGY would be directed to the hamlets where the dominant caste lived, and there's no proper auditing to ensure that this funds actually went to the people from those hamlets.
Wow, so there's really, from what you've just said, you can really encapsulate the gap between what can be executed in India and the promise that policy making holds if you have the right public motivated to be a part of it. My last question to you before we wrap up this podcast, Therese, we've noticed the implementation of many government-related schemes like MyGov, which is an interactive platform for members of the public to actively engage and provide their say on the existing policy making progress in the nation.
So again, I think MyGov is MyGov. I think is really, as you're possibly leading through the question itself, is very very distant from what is happening on the ground. I mean, to state the cliche, how many people are actually accessing internet at that level? I mean, people are accessing internet for sure at an increased level, but how many people are using these platforms to understand public policy is a different question altogether. And I feel a lot of times there are enough schemes and policies that are reaching the ground, and those are the kind. I mean, people. I don't think at the moment are researching for policies. I don't think we have reached a state. We haven't raised the floor enough for people to do that yet. We still depend on government communicating the idea through, let's say, information and education material, saying that these are the things that's happening. And that's why a lot of times we think of government initiatives in terms of a floor racer and a roof racer, for instance, where floor racer is essentially that now this is the lowest bar. Imagine we are increasing the lowest bar, and the roof racer is essentially we are increasing what the government can do as a highest bar. And in terms of the highest bar that the government can do, I think this MyGov is a good example. But yes, a lot of times the roof racing efforts of the government, while they're important, are very important, but I think we should also possibly focus a lot more on the floor racing components that the government should do. And in terms of the country, the situation that you said, I think if you could repeat that once more, it'll just make it a little more clear.
Oh, so I was just saying that, there's a big gap between what is promised for the nation as the form of policies and what has already been executed at their disposal. The platforms like MyGov has really, pushed the need for involving the public, but still there's a lot of reluctance in being involved, and there's not much changes in the existing policy, which really reflects the lack of participation. So what is the scope, really? Do we need a platform like MyGov where citizens are cognizant of the policy-making progress and how they can really shape their say in the communities they live in?
For sure. I completely agree. Again, that I do completely agree, because we do need something like, we need spaces where the voices of individuals can be shaped in communities. But in India, I think we will always still have a very marginal population using these kind of platforms. And to this day, I think the largest population possibly still depends on the very classic Gram Sabha to raise their concerns. about public policy and their demands. And I think, and I've seen how that manifests as a very strong requirement a strong requirement for people in the grassroots. And about the second part, I just also wanted to divide the part of your question where you said India is delivering very poorly. And I just wanted to state an anecdote a small thing that I picked up from a podcast, Amit Verma's, some discussion he had with Karthik Muralidharan, where he was talking about a very simple way of talking about why our delivery has been very poor. And I just wanted to shed a little light on that as well. And he was essentially saying that in India, government as the legislature makes a lot of policies that are very ambitious, and government as an executive, because the state capacity is so low, is not able to implement these very ambitious legislations that we have. And because they are not able to implement these legislations, government as the judiciary then holds the government as the executive accountable for not being able to ensure all of these ambitious policies are actually taking place. And this further weakens the system, because executive that would have spent time implementing the system is now spending time in courts answering the judge. So this is also, in terms of, it's just a very interesting framework to think about why our government is failing a lot of times, and also an indication towards what we can do to possibly improve the system delivery.
That pretty much sums up the scope and vision of what and where is policy making in India. Well, with that, we come to the end of this episode of A Tryst with Statecraft. Thank you so much to our guest speaker, Teras Najeeb. What an insightful experience into delving into the world of public policy. Truly a new dimension given to it, considering that you've worked so proactively in the grassroots level with the village panchayat, and understanding the intricacies in the state and central level, and what really holds people accountable for the policies they say. And moreover, we got an insight as to what awaits youth when they are actively engaged in their say of how they have their world dictated by the policies framed by the government. So thank you so much for that, Teras. It's truly been an honor. Thank you so much for joining us here at Project Statecraft episode of A Tryst with Statecraft. I'm your host, Teresa Kuruvara, signing out.